The Great Hall of the Galactic Council stretched out like a crystal cave, its walls glowing with soft blue light that came from nowhere and everywhere at once. Jake Morrison stood in the center of the massive room, his black dress uniform making him look small against the towering alien forms that surrounded him. 3 years he had served as Earth's ambassador to this place. 3 years of watching humanity prove itself over and over again to beings who barely saw them as equals. Above him, Speaker Veltar's crystalline body caught the light and threw it back in sharp rainbows across the floor. The hegemony leader was 20 feet tall, his form made of living crystal that pulsed with inner fire when he spoke. Around the circular chamber, other council members sat in their designated areas. The Zephani delegation looked like giant mantises made of silver metal, their compound eyes reflecting everything in fractured images. The void speakers had no solid form at all, just shifting clouds of purple gas that somehow managed to speak, through speakers built into their containment fields. The Construct Collective appeared as perfect geometric shapes that moved and reformed themselves as they thought. Jake had learned to read their moods over the years. Today they were impatient and dismissive. He could see it in the way Veltar's crystal form pulsed faster than usual, in how the Zephani clicked their mandibles together in rapid succession, in the agitated swirling of the void speaker clouds. "The matter is decided," Veltar announced, his voice echoing through the chamber like breaking glass. "The human fleet will be transferred to Council Command immediately. Your ships will serve as the advance force in our campaign against the Free Worlds Alliance. This is not a request." Captain Lisa Barnes stood beside Jake, her hand resting on the ceremonial sword at her side. She commanded the human defense fleet, 57 ships that had saved more alien lives than anyone in this room wanted to count. Her face remained calm, but Jake could see the anger burning in her dark eyes. Behind them, the rest of the human delegation waited in silence. Dr. Nina Ross, who had spent 2 years developing cures for alien diseases that their own doctors couldn't treat. Engineer Carl Davis, whose designs had protected 17 Council worlds from asteroid impacts and solar flares. Businessman Tony Green, who had established trade routes that brought prosperity to dozens of struggling colonies. "Your species has shown adequate capability," continued the Zephani representative, its translated voice sounding like grinding metal. "However, your emotional attachments to individual lives make you unsuitable for strategic command. You will follow Council directives without question." Jake almost laughed. Emotional attachments. That was their way of saying humans cared too much about keeping people alive. In the past 3 years, human forces had saved over 2 billion alien lives across 43 different worlds. They had stopped 3 genocides, prevented 2 star systems from going to war, and solved resource conflicts that had been raging for decades. All because humans had this strange idea that every life mattered. The void speakers added their opinion, their purple gas swirling faster as they spoke. The Free Worlds Alliance has proven resistant to conventional tactics. Human forces will absorb the initial casualties, while Council fleets maneuver for decisive strikes. This is the most efficient use of available resources. Resources. That's what they called human lives. Jake remembered the Battle of Kepler Station, where Commander Rick Morgan had led 12 human ships against an enemy fleet of 60 vessels to buy time for the evacuation of 3 million civilians. Morgan and his crews had died to the last person, but those 3 million aliens were alive today because humans thought their lives were worth saving. "The Council acknowledges human contributions to date," Veltar said, his tone suggesting he was offering a great favor. "However, your continued membership requires absolute compliance with Council directives. You will transfer command of your fleet within 72 hours. The chamber fell silent. Jake looked around at the assembled aliens, these beings who controlled most of the galaxy. They saw humanity as useful tools, nothing more. Weapons to be pointed at their enemies and discarded. When broken, the humans had hoped that proving their worth would earn them respect. But respect had to be given freely. It couldn't be forced or earned through service. Jake took a deep breath and stepped forward. His voice carried clearly through the vast chamber. No. The word hung in the air like a physical thing. Veltar's crystal form stopped pulsing. The Zephani went completely still. Even the void speakers ceased their constant swirling. "I'm sorry," Veltar said, his voice carrying disbelief. "Did you just refuse a direct council directive?" "I did," Jake replied calmly. "Furthermore, the Earth government has instructed me to inform the council that humanity is withdrawing from this organization, effective immediately. We're going home." The explosion of sound that followed was unlike anything Jake had ever heard. Crystalline voices rang like breaking glass, metallic voices screeched like grinding gears, and gaseous voices roared like wind through canyons. The Construct Collective's geometric forms spun wildly as they processed this unprecedented development. "No species has ever withdrawn from the Council," the Zephani representative declared. "It is impossible." "Apparently not," Captain Barnes said, speaking for the first time. Her voice was steady and professional. "Admiral Williams has already been notified. The withdrawal process has begun." Veltar's form blazed with angry light. "You cannot simply leave. There are contracts, obligations, treaties." "All of which will be honored," Jake said. "Humanity will complete its current commitments and pay any outstanding debts. But we will not serve as cannon fodder for beings who see us as expendable resources." "This is treason," the void speakers hissed. "You will be branded as deserters and face the consequences." Jake smiled for the first time since entering the chamber. "Brand us however you like. We'll be too far away to care." He turned and walked toward the exit, his delegation following behind him. Captain Barnes was the last to leave, and she paused at the doorway to look back at the chaos they were leaving behind. "Humanity wishes you well," she said quietly. "But we're done being your disposable heroes." The doors closed behind them with a soft hiss, sealing off the angry voices of the Galactic Council. For the first time in 3 years, Jake Morrison felt free. The message reached every human outpost in the galaxy within 6 hours of Jake Morrison's declaration. Admiral Pete Williams sat in his command chair aboard the flagship Liberty, watching as confirmation signals came in from across known space. His weathered face showed no emotion as he read each response, but inside he felt a mixture of pride and sadness that surprised him. "All stations reporting in, sir," reported Lieutenant Amy Foster from her position at the communications console. "Total of 412 installations, ranging from full colonies to single-person research posts. Everyone has acknowledged the withdrawal order." Williams nodded slowly. 412 places where humans had made their mark on the galaxy. Medical stations where Dr. Nina Ross and her teams had worked miracles. Trading posts where people like Tony Green had built bridges between species. Military bases where soldiers had died protecting alien worlds. All of it was coming to an end. On the main screen, Williams could see the first ships already departing from their positions. Captain Barnes had wasted no time in beginning the evacuation of the forward military bases. Her ships moved with the, precision that had made human forces so effective, but now they were retreating instead of advancing. The withdrawal was planned like a military operation, because that's exactly what it was. Williams had spent 30 years in space, and he knew that leaving was often harder than arriving. The humans couldn't just pack up and run. They had responsibilities, debts to settle, and relationships to honor. Most importantly, they had to leave with their dignity intact. At the Meridian Medical Station, Dr. Helen Parker supervised the shutdown of the most advanced hospital in the galaxy. She had spent 18 months developing treatments for the Zarian Plague, a disease that had killed millions across the Outer Rim. Her research was nearly complete, but the samples and data would come with her. The alien doctors who had worked alongside her pleaded for her to stay, but orders were orders. "I'm sorry," she told Dr. Zulmak. the hegemony physician who had become her closest colleague. "I truly am. But my government has made its decision." The crystal-bodied alien's form pulsed with distress. "Your research could save billions of lives. How can your leaders be so selfish?" Helen paused in her packing. "Selfish? We've given 3 years of our lives to this galaxy. We've lost thousands of our people defending worlds that aren't even our own. And in return, the Council wants to use us as disposable weapons. Who's really being selfish here?" Across the galaxy, similar conversations were taking place. Engineer Carl Davis faced angry questions from the construction crews on New Titan, where his designs had turned a barren rock into a thriving colony world. The automated systems he had built were so advanced that the local aliens couldn't maintain them without human help. But that wasn't his problem anymore. "You can't just leave us," protested Foreman Kethvar, his insectoid form clicking with agitation. "These systems require constant adjustment. Without your oversight, everything will break down within months." Carl finished loading his personal equipment onto the transport shuttle. "I trained your people for 2 years. I gave you detailed manuals and emergency procedures. If you choose not to use them, that's on you." The most difficult goodbyes came at the trade stations. Tony Green had built a network of commercial relationships that spanned dozens of worlds. Alien merchants who had grown wealthy through human connections now faced the collapse of their entire business model. The humans had introduced new manufacturing techniques, established shipping routes, and created markets for products that had never existed before. "Please reconsider," begged Merchant Prince Varthok of the Trade Federation. "Our partnership has been profitable for everyone involved. Surely we can work out some arrangement." Tony shook his head sadly. "It's not about profit, Varthok. It's about respect. The Council sees us as tools to be used and discarded. We can't build real partnerships with people who think that way." At the military bases, the withdrawal was more complex. Human forces had been integrated with alien units for years. They had fought together, bled together, and formed bonds that transcended species. Captain Susan Hayes watched her mixed human-alien squadron prepare for separation, knowing that many of these aliens would die in the coming war without human tactical support. "This feels like abandonment," said Wing Commander Trelmus, a Zephani, pilot who had served under Hayes for 2 years. "We are stronger together than apart." "I agree," Hayes replied. "But the Council doesn't. They want human ships to charge into enemy fire while alien commanders stay safe in the rear. That's not partnership. It's exploitation." The news networks across the galaxy buzzed with confusion and speculation. Most aliens couldn't understand why humanity was leaving. The official Council statement claimed that humans had proven unreliable and emotionally unstable, but many alien civilians knew better. They had seen human doctors save their children, human engineers protect their homes, and human soldiers die for their freedom. On the industrial world of Kethmar, worker strikes broke out when the human technical advisors departed. The factories that produced everything from basic tools to starship components had been designed by human engineers and relied on human expertise to function. Without that knowledge, production ground to a halt within days. Similar problems erupted across dozens of worlds. The humans had been far more integrated into galactic civilization than anyone had realized. They weren't just participants in the Council system, they were essential to its operation. Their departure left gaps that couldn't be filled quickly or easily. Admiral Williams watched the reports coming in from across the galaxy. Supply chain disruptions, medical crises, technical failures, and economic collapse were spreading like ripples from humanity's withdrawal. Part of him felt sorry for the aliens who would suffer, but he reminded himself that this was the Council's choice, not humanity's. "Final transport departing from Sector 7, reported Lieutenant Foster. "That's the last of our people in Council space." Williams stood up from his command chair and walked to the main viewport. Outside, he could see the last human ships forming up for the journey home. 57 warships, 200 civilian vessels, and over 1 million human citizens who had spent years building lives among the stars. All of them were coming home. because the galaxy's leaders couldn't tell the difference between partnership and servitude. "Set course for the outer rim," he ordered. "Take us beyond council space." "Sir," Foster asked quietly, "where exactly are we going?" Williams smiled grimly. "Somewhere we can build something better, somewhere we can prepare for what's coming." The human fleet moved away from council territory. Williams thought about the ancient records that Earth's archaeologists had been studying, records that spoke of previous galactic civilizations and the threats they had faced. The council thought they were getting rid of a problem by letting humanity go, but Williams knew they were making the biggest mistake in galactic history. Behind them, the lights of council space grew dimmer and dimmer until they disappeared entirely. Ahead lay the unknown, and whatever challenges it might bring. But for the first time in 3 years, humanity was free to face those challenges on their own terms. The exodus was complete. 6 months after the last human ship disappeared beyond the galactic rim, the first cracks in the Council's confidence began to show. General Varkesh of the Hegemony military stood before a tactical display that painted a picture of complete disaster. Red markers showed Free World's Alliance victories spreading across the outer territories like a plague. "How many ships did we lose at Vega Prime?" Speaker Veltar asked, his crystalline form pulsing with barely controlled anger. 43 vessels, Varkesh replied, his voice hollow. "The entire 5th Battle Group. The rebels used hit and run tactics, striking our supply lines and disappearing before we could respond. It's exactly the same strategy the humans used against the Pirate Confederacy 2 years ago." The chamber fell silent. Everyone remembered that campaign. Commander Rick Morgan had taken 12 human ships against a pirate fleet of over 200 vessels and won decisively. He had taught the Free World's Alliance everything they knew about asymmetric warfare before humanity's departure. "The rebels are using human tactics," admitted Admiral Theknor of the Void Speaker Fleet. "Our traditional battle formations are useless against these new strategies. They refuse to engage our main forces directly." Veltar's crystal body blazed with frustrated light. "Then adapt. Learn their methods and use them against the rebels." "It's not that simple," Varkesh said quietly. "Human tactical thinking doesn't translate well to our command structures. They made decisions based on intuition and creativity. Our officers are trained for logical, methodical approaches. We're fighting an enemy that thinks like humans, but we can't think like humans ourselves." The military situation was just the beginning of the Council's problems. On the medical station orbiting Kepler 4, Dr. Zulmak watched helplessly as the Zerion plague spread through the outer rim worlds. Without Dr. Helen Parker's research, the best they could do was slow the disease's advance. "How many dead this week?" asked Chief Medical Officer Lindar, her insectoid form trembling with exhaustion. 12 million confirmed, Zulmak replied. "But the real number is probably twice that. We can't even reach half the infected worlds anymore." His crystal form had lost its inner glow, dimmed by months of failure and frustration. Dr. Parker was so close to a cure. Her preliminary trials showed 90% effectiveness. "Where is her research now?" Lindar asked, though she already knew the answer. "Gone with her to wherever the humans went, along with every other breakthrough they were working on." Zulmak turned away from the medical displays showing the plague's spread. "We saved them from the pirates, gave them council membership, and they abandoned us when we needed them most. But it wasn't just the military and medical situations that were falling apart. The economic crisis hit even harder than anyone had expected. Merchant Prince Zulvan of the Trade Federation stood in his empty warehouse, looking at shipping containers that would never be filled again. The Terran Manufacturing Consortium was producing 60% of our medical supplies, his assistant reported. The Human Engineering Corps designed the automated systems for 43 major industrial worlds. Green's trading network handled logistics for over 200 shipping routes. Zulvan's serpentine form coiled with nervous energy. Surely other species can fill these gaps. Not quickly, sir. Human manufacturing was more efficient than anything we had before. Their designs were more reliable. Their logistics networks were more flexible. Replacing all of that will take years, maybe decades. Already, basic goods were becoming scarce on dozens of worlds. Medical supplies, computer components, industrial machinery, even simple tools were in short supply. The humans had been producing things that other species had forgotten how to make or had never learned to make in the first place. On the colony world of New Titan, the situation was becoming desperate. The automated systems that Carl Davis had designed were breaking down one by one. The local engineers tried to follow his manuals, but the technology was beyond their understanding. The water recycling system is operating at 30% efficiency, reported Chief Engineer Takmar. The atmospheric processors are showing stress fractures. The power grid is fluctuating. Colony Administrator Kel Thas looked out at the HFY city that humans had helped them build. Without the automated systems, New Titan couldn't support its population of 8 million. How long before we have to evacuate? 6 months, maybe less. Unless we can find someone who understands human engineering. But there was no one. The humans had taken their knowledge with them, leaving behind machines that other species couldn't repair or replace. Across the galaxy, similar scenes were playing out on dozens of worlds that had become dependent on human technology and expertise. The political situation was just as bad. The HFY Federation had watched the Council's treatment of humanity with growing alarm. Ambassador Delphine of the HFY addressed her own government from the council chambers. If they can discard humanity so easily, what's to stop them from discarding us? She asked. The humans were model citizens. They followed every law, completed every mission, sacrificed their lives for council worlds. And the moment they showed independence, they were branded as traitors. The HFY Federation announced their withdrawal from the council 3 weeks later. The Independent Systems Alliance followed within days. Other smaller member species began making quiet inquiries about the withdrawal process. Speaker Veltar found himself leading a council that was shrinking by the month. The remaining members were growing suspicious of each other and questioning every decision. The unity that had held the galaxy together for centuries was cracking under the pressure of humanity's absence. We need to contact Earth, suggested Counselor Kethmori of the Archive Worlds during a closed session. Perhaps we can negotiate their return. Absolutely not, Veltar declared. We will not grovel before a species that abandoned their responsibilities. The Council is stronger without their emotional instability. But privately, even Veltar was beginning to doubt his words. Reports came in daily of new disasters. The rebels had captured 3 major shipyards using tactics copied from human military manuals. The plague had reached the core worlds, threatening species that had never faced such a disease. The economy was in free fall as supply chains collapsed, without human logistics networks. In the depths of space, Scout Commander Pete Anderson detected something that made his blood run cold. Long-range sensors had picked up massive energy signatures from beyond the galactic rim. Ships, but unlike anything in the Council database. They were huge, powerful, and heading toward Council space at incredible speed. Sir, his communications officer reported, the energy patterns match some very old records from the Archive Worlds. They call them Devourers in the ancient texts. Anderson had heard whispers about the Devourers during his time working with human archaeologists. They were supposedly an extragalactic threat that appeared every few thousand years to consume entire civilizations. Most council members dismissed them as legend. How long until they reach our territory? Anderson asked. At current speed, 18 months, maybe less. Anderson stared at the display showing the approaching signatures. The council was falling apart, the military was in chaos, and the economy was collapsing. And now, an ancient enemy was returning to finish what previous invasions had started. For the first time since humanity's departure, Anderson wondered if the Council had made a terrible mistake. The humans had always been the ones to find solutions to impossible problems. They were the ones who thought outside conventional wisdom and found ways to win against overwhelming odds. But the humans were gone, disappeared into the unknown regions, beyond Council space. And Anderson had the sinking feeling that the galaxy was going to need them more than anyone had imagined. The clock was ticking, and the Council was running out of time to fix the mess they had made. A year after humanity's departure, the Galactic Council was no longer the powerful organization that had once ruled most of the galaxy. Speaker Veltar stood alone in the Great Chamber, his crystal form dim and fractured from stress. Only half. The original member species remained, and even they were questioning every decision the Council made. The Free Worlds Alliance had grown beyond anyone's worst fears. What had started as a small rebel movement now controlled over 60% of Council territory. They called themselves the Human Liberation Movement now, even though no humans fought in their ranks. Their leaders claimed to be fighting for the same principles that humanity had represented: freedom from Council oppression and the right of species to govern themselves. General Varkesh's latest report painted a picture of complete military collapse. "We've lost the Antares sector," he announced to the sparse gathering of Council members. "Rebel forces overran our defenses using coordinated small unit tactics. They're fighting exactly like humans taught them to fight." The Zephani representative clicked his mandibles in distress. "How is this possible? We outnumber them 3-1. "Numbers don't matter when the enemy refuses to face you directly," Varkesh replied bitterly. "They hit our supply lines, destroy our communication networks, and disappear before we can respond. Every time we mass our forces for a decisive battle, they simply fade away and attack somewhere else." It was the same story everywhere. The rebels had learned from the best teachers in the galaxy, and those teachers were no longer around to help the Council develop countermeasures. Human tactical manuals were being studied obsessively by Council strategists, but understanding the tactics and implementing them were two different things. The medical crisis had reached catastrophic proportions. Dr. Zulmak stood in the emergency command center on Kepler Station, watching helplessly as red warning lights spread across the galactic map. The Zirion plague had evolved, mutating into new forms that their existing treatments couldn't touch. "Casualty reports are coming in from 47 worlds," his assistant reported. "The death toll has passed 1 billion, and that's just in the past month." Zulmak's crystal form had lost all its inner light. He looked like a dead thing, a hollow shell of what he had once been. "Any word from the research teams on possible treatments?" "Nothing promising, sir. Without Dr. Parker's work as a foundation, we're basically starting from scratch, and the plague keeps changing faster than we can adapt." The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The humans had been close to a cure when they left. Dr. Helen Parker's research could have saved billions of lives, but it had vanished along with every other human innovation. The Council had traded their greatest medical minds for the privilege of using human soldiers as cannon fodder, but the worst crisis was something that most Council members didn't even know about yet. Deep in the archive worlds, ancient Zeridian artifacts were awakening after millions of years of dormancy. Dr. Mary Kim had been studying these relics before humanity's departure, but her research had been incomplete when she left. Archive keeper Linthara stood before one of the artifacts as it pulsed with growing energy. The crystalline structure was beautiful and terrifying, humming with power that could reshape matter at the atomic level. "The resonance patterns are accelerating," she reported to her superiors. "If this continues, the artifact could destabilize the entire star system." Similar reports were coming in from across the galaxy. Dozens of Zeridian sites were showing increased activity, and no one understood why. The artifacts were beyond current understanding, relics of a civilization that had vanished long before any current species had developed space travel. "What did the human researcher conclude about these devices?" asked Chief Archivist Vel Morath. "Dr. Kim believed they were some kind of early warning system," Linthara replied. "She was working on a theory that they activate in response to extragalactic threats." But she never finished her research. The economic situation was even worse than the military one. Merchant Prince Zulvan watched his trade empire crumble as the last human-built factories shut down. The automated systems were too complex for other species to maintain, and replacement parts were impossible to obtain. The Kethmar industrial complex has gone offline, his assistant reported. That's the last of the major manufacturing centers. Without those facilities, we can't produce starship components, medical equipment, or advanced electronics. Zulvan coiled his serpentine form around his command throne, a gesture of deep distress among his people. How long before complete economic collapse? At current rates, 6 months. Maybe less if more systems fail. Entire worlds were becoming uninhabitable as their life support systems broke down. The colony of New Titan had already been evacuated. Its 8 million residents relocated to overcrowded worlds that could barely support their own populations. Similar evacuations were being planned for dozens of other human-engineered colonies. The political situation was just as desperate. The Aquari Federation and Independent Systems Alliance had been joined by 6 other species in leaving the Council. The remaining members were growing increasingly suspicious of each other, forming secret alliances and making separate peace deals with the rebels. "The Council is dying," Councillor Kethamori told Veltar during a private meeting. "We're down to 12 member species, and 3 of them have already opened negotiations with the Human Liberation Movement." Veltar's crystal form flared with angry light. "Those negotiations are illegal under Council law." "What law?" Kethamori asked pointedly. "Who's going to enforce it? Our military is in retreat across the entire galaxy. Our economy is collapsing. Our worlds are dying from plague and system failures. We have no authority left to enforce anything." The final blow came when Scout Commander Pete Anderson's report reached the Council chambers. The energy signatures he had detected beyond the galactic rim were getting stronger and closer. Analysis of the ancient records had confirmed everyone's worst fears. "The Devourers are real," Anderson reported to the emergency session. "They're an extragalactic force that appears every few thousand years to consume entire civilizations. According to the Archive World Records, they've destroyed at least 3 previous galactic societies." The chamber erupted in panic. Some representatives called for immediate evacuation of core worlds. Others demanded a massive military buildup. A few suggested trying to negotiate with the approaching threat. "How long do we have?" Veltar asked, his voice cracking like breaking glass. 12 months, maybe less," Anderson replied. "Their advance. Scouts have already entered our outer territories. Full invasion will begin within a year." The irony was crushing. The Council faced its greatest threat in millions of years, and they had driven away the only species that had consistently found solutions to impossible problems. The humans were gone, vanished into the unknown regions beyond Council space, and no one knew how to contact them. "We need to find Earth," Councillor Kethamori said what everyone was thinking. "We need to ask for their help." "Absolutely not," Veltar declared. But his protest sounded hollow even to himself. "We will not humiliate ourselves by begging for assistance from deserters." But privately, Veltar knew the truth. The Council had made the biggest mistake in galactic history when they let humanity walk away. They had treated their greatest allies as disposable resources and driven them into exile. Now, with an ancient enemy approaching and the galaxy falling apart, they needed those allies more than ever. The question wasn't whether they should ask for human help. The question was whether humanity would even answer their call after being betrayed so completely, and whether there was still time to fix the damage that pride and prejudice had caused. In the depths of space, the Devourer fleet continued its inexorable approach. Ancient weapons charged with power that could unmake stars, ships larger than cities prepared for the harvest that would strip entire solar systems of life and energy. The galaxy was running out of time, and its leaders were finally beginning to understand what they had lost when they let humanity walk away. The invasion began without warning on a Tuesday morning, Galactic Standard Time. The first Devourer ships punched through the dimensional barrier at the galaxy's edge like massive spears thrown by an angry god. Each vessel was the size of a small moon, its dark hull absorbing light and energy from everything around it. Within hours, the outer rim colony of Theta Centauri simply ceased to exist. Its entire star system consumed and converted into raw energy. Admiral Varkesh stood in the emergency command center, watching the sensor displays with growing horror. "How many ships?" he asked, though he dreaded the answer. "Initial count shows 300 vessels in the first wave," his aide reported. "But long-range sensors detect thousands more beyond the barrier. And, sir, the energy readings are off. The scale. Each of those ships has more firepower than our entire remaining fleet. The Free Worlds Alliance and the Galactic Council forgot their war in the face of extinction. Commander Jake Thane, leader of the rebel forces, found himself in the same room as General Varkesh for the first time in 2 years. Both men looked haggard and desperate. "We need to combine our fleets," Thane said without preamble. "Whatever differences we have don't matter anymore." Varkesh nodded grimly. "Agreed. But even together, we're facing an enemy that could destroy us without breaking stride. The ancient records say these devourers have consumed entire galactic civilizations." Speaker Veltar materialized in the command center, his crystal form flickering with unstable energy. The stress of the past year had taken its toll on him. Cracks ran through his crystalline body, and his inner light was dim and unsteady. "Status. Report," he demanded. 7 star systems consumed in the first 6 hours, Varkesh replied. "The Devourers aren't just destroying our worlds. They're converting matter directly into energy. Each system they consume makes them stronger." "And our response?" Thane answered before the general could speak. "We've thrown everything we have at them. 60 ships attacked the lead elements 2 hours ago. None returned. Our weapons don't even slow them down." The full scope of the disaster became clear as reports flooded in from across the galaxy. The Devourers weren't following conventional invasion patterns. They weren't trying to capture territory or subdue populations. They were simply consuming everything in their path, converting stars and planets into pure energy that powered their advance. Dr. Zulmak worked frantically in his laboratory, trying to understand the invaders' technology. Their ships seemed to exist partially outside normal space-time, he reported. "That's why our weapons pass right through them. They can phase in and out of reality at will." The Zeridian artifacts had gone completely active now, their ancient warning systems screaming, alerts that no one alive could understand. Archive Keeper. Linthara stood before the largest artifact on Zerid Prime, watching patterns of light flow across its surface. "Dr. Kim was right," she told Chief Archivist Velmorath. "These are early warning systems, but they're more than that. According to the patterns I'm seeing, they're also some kind of defensive network. The problem is, no one knows how to activate them." "What about Dr. Kim's research? Didn't she leave any clues?" "She took everything with her when humanity departed. All we have are her preliminary notes, and they're incomplete." The desperate truth was becoming clear to everyone. The galaxy faced an enemy that had destroyed civilizations far more advanced than their own, and their greatest hope lay in technology that only one missing species had understood. The humans were gone, and with them had vanished the galaxy's best chance for survival. Merchant Prince Zulvan found himself coordinating refugee evacuation efforts as world after world fell to the Devourer advance. "We need ships," he told anyone who would listen. "Cargo vessels, passenger liners, anything that can carry people away from the invasion zone, but there were never enough ships. The human-built logistics networks that had made large-scale transportation possible were gone, replaced by makeshift arrangements that could barely handle normal traffic, let alone a galaxy-wide evacuation. The Devourers consumed the industrial world of Kethmar in less than an hour. Billions of lives snuffed out as the planet's mass was converted into energy to fuel the invasion fleet. The sight broke something fundamental in the minds of those who witnessed it. "They're not even trying to preserve anything," reported Captain Susan Hayes, who had rejoined the Council fleet as the crisis deepened. No prisoners, no slaves, no conquered territory. They just consume everything and move on. The psychological impact was almost as devastating as the physical destruction. Entire species were fleeing their homeworlds in panic, clogging the remaining transportation networks and creating chaos throughout Council space. Governments collapsed as officials abandoned their posts to save their own families. In desperation, the Council authorized the release of the most classified archives. Ancient texts that had been sealed for millennia were opened, searching for any clue about how previous civilizations had dealt with the devourer threat. Counselor Kethmori stood before the assembled leadership with a datapad containing the most disturbing information yet discovered. "I've found references to previous invasions," she announced. "This has happened at least 3 times before in galactic history, and according to these records, only one type of species has ever successfully repelled the devourers." "What type?" Veltar asked, though something in his voice suggested he already knew the answer. "Species that the records call Terrans, aggressive, adaptable, emotionally driven, and willing to sacrifice themselves for others. The descriptions match humanity perfectly." The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. The galaxy's salvation had always come from species like humanity, and they had driven their best hope away through pride and prejudice. "The records indicate that Terran species don't just fight the devourers," Kethmori continued. "They somehow turn the ancient defense systems against the invaders. The Zeridian artifacts respond to Terran mental patterns in ways they don't respond to other species." Dr. Alex Turner's name appeared in dozens of research files. The human archaeologist had been closer than anyone to understanding how the ancient defense network functioned. His theories about quantum consciousness interfaces and biological activation keys were the galaxy's best hope for survival. But Turner was gone, along with every other human expert. Earth's location was unknown, and even if they could find it, there was no guarantee that humanity would help the species that had cast them aside. "We have to try," Commander Thane said during the emergency council session. "Send envoys to search for them, broadcast messages on every frequency, offer whatever they want in exchange for their help." "And if they refuse?" Veltar asked. "Then we die," Thane replied simply. "The devourers will consume this galaxy just like they consumed the others, and it will be our own fault for throwing away our best chance at survival." Scout ships launched immediately, heading for the unknown regions where humanity had vanished. Long-range communication arrays broadcast desperate pleas into the void, hoping that somewhere beyond the galactic rim, human ears were listening. But time was running out. The Devourer fleet consumed more systems each day, growing stronger as they advanced toward the galaxy's core. At their current rate of progress, they would reach the remaining population centers within 6 months. The greatest military alliance in galactic history was powerless against an enemy that existed partially outside reality. The most advanced medical science couldn't cure a plague that had evolved beyond all known treatments. The most sophisticated technology couldn't function without the engineers who had designed it, and somewhere in the vast darkness beyond known space, the only hope for survival was lost among the stars. The galaxy was learning too late that some mistakes can never be undone, and some bridges, once burned, cannot be rebuilt. The question now was whether humanity would choose to answer their call for help, or let the species that had rejected them face extinction alone. The Devourers continued their relentless advance, and the clock continued to tick down toward the end of everything. Deep in the unknown regions beyond the galactic rim, the human fleet had not been idle during their 18 months of exile. Admiral Pete Williams stood on the bridge of the colony ship New Horizon, watching as the final preparations for departure were completed. Around him, displays showed a level of activity that would have amazed the council leaders who had dismissed humanity as primitive and emotional. The humans had found something extraordinary in the void between galaxies. Dr. Mary Kim's archaeological team had discovered the ruins of the last civilization to face the Devourers. a species called the predecessors who had left behind detailed records of their final war. Unlike the fragmentary accounts in Council archives, these records were complete and recent, less than 10,000 years old. "The weapon systems are ready," reported Engineer Carl Davis from his position at the tactical console. "Dr. Turner's modifications to the Zeridian technology are complete and tested. We've managed to create a resonance pattern that should disrupt the Devourer's quantum phase shifting." Williams nodded, but his expression remained grim. "And the cost?" "Significant," Dr. Helen Parker answered from the medical station. "The biological interface requires a direct neural connection to the Zeridian network. The feedback could kill whoever operates it." "Could?" "Will," she corrected quietly. "The energy levels are simply too high for human nervous systems to survive. Whoever activates the network will die in the process." The bridge fell silent. This was the reality they had discovered in the predecessor ruins. The ancient defense network could stop the Devourers, but only at the cost of the operator's life. It was a price that previous civilizations had been unwilling to pay, choosing destruction over sacrifice. "How many volunteers do we have?" Williams asked. "Everyone," Captain Lisa Barnes replied. "Every human in the fleet has volunteered for the neural interface mission. We're going to have to draw lots to see who gets the honor." The communication alert interrupted their planning. The Council's desperate messages had finally reached them, carried by quantum relays that Dr. Turner's team had been monitoring since their departure. The pleas for help were pathetic in their desperation, a far cry from the arrogant demands that had driven humanity into exile. "They're offering everything," Communications Officer Amy Foster reported. "Full Council membership with voting rights, reparations for their treatment of us, complete autonomy for human space. They're even offering to make Admiral Williams the supreme military commander of all Council forces." "Too little, too late," muttered Captain Barnes. "They had 3 years to treat us with respect, and they chose exploitation instead." Williams read through the messages carefully. The reports of Devourer advances painted a picture of complete devastation. Hundreds of billions of alien lives had already been lost, and the invasion was accelerating. At their current pace, the Devourers would consume the entire galaxy within 6 months. "Sir," Foster said quietly, "there's a personal message here from Speaker Veltar. He's requesting to speak with you directly." Williams considered for a moment, then nodded. "Put him through." Veltar's image appeared on the main screen, and Williams was shocked by what he saw. The proud crystalline being who had dismissed humanity so contemptuously was now a broken shell. His crystal form was cracked and dim, his inner light flickering, like a dying flame. "Admiral Williams," Veltar began, his voice barely above a whisper, "I come before you not as Speaker of the Council, but as a being who has made terrible mistakes. I was wrong about humanity. We were all wrong." Williams said nothing, waiting for the alien leader to continue. "We treated you as tools instead of allies. We saw your compassion as weakness and your independence as defiance. We were fools, and now our entire civilization is paying the price for our pride." Veltar's form pulsed weakly. "I'm not asking you to save us because we deserve it. We don't. I'm asking you to save us because it's who you are." The message ended, leaving the bridge in silence. Williams looked around at his officers, seeing his own conflicted emotions reflected in their faces. These aliens had used them, dismissed them, and cast them aside. But they were still living beings facing extinction. "What are your orders, sir?" Barnes asked. Williams thought about the children he had seen on Council worlds, alien youngsters who had played with human kids in the colony, schools. He thought about Dr. Zulmak, who had worked alongside Dr. Parker to save lives during the plague outbreaks. He thought about the millions of innocent civilians who would die if the Devourers weren't stopped. "Prep the fleet for departure," he ordered. "We're going back." "Sir?" Barnes looked surprised. "They don't deserve our help." "No, they don't," Williams agreed. "But this isn't about what they deserve. It's about who we choose to be." The human fleet emerged from hyperspace just as the Devourer Vanguard reached the Altair system. Williams watched the tactical display as the massive alien ships began their consumption of the system's outer planets. The sight was both terrifying and awe-inspiring, raw power on a scale that dwarfed anything he had ever seen. "All human ships, this is Admiral Williams," he broadcast on all frequencies. "Execute Battle Plan Omega. Target the phase generators on the lead vessels. Dr. Turner, begin the Zeridian network activation sequence." The human fleet moved with precision born of desperate preparation. Unlike the scattered, panicked resistance the Devourers had faced so far, the humans attacked with coordinated purpose. Their modified weapons struck at the quantum anchor points that allowed the Devourer ships to phase in and out of reality. For the first time since the invasion began, Devourer ships took damage. Several of the smaller vessels flickered and became solid, vulnerable to conventional attack. The sight sent shockwaves through both the Devourer fleet and the watching Council forces. "This is Captain Hayes to all Council ships," Susan Hayes broadcast from her command vessel. "Follow human targeting solutions. Concentrate fire on vessels showing quantum instability." The combined fleet launched a desperate assault on the Devourer. Formation. Human ships led the charge, their crews knowing that many of them would not survive the battle. But for the first time in months, the defenders were fighting with hope instead of despair. Dr. Alex Turner worked frantically at the Zeridian interface aboard the research vessel Discovery. The ancient technology responded to his thoughts, patterns of light flowing across crystalline surfaces as the defense network came online. He could feel the power building, a tide of energy that would sweep across the galaxy and disrupt every Devourer ship simultaneously. "Neural feedback approaching critical levels," Dr. Parker warned from the medical station. "Alex, you need to finish the sequence now." Turner's hands moved across the control interface, his mind merging with technology that was older than human civilization. The network stretched across thousands of light years, connecting artifacts on hundreds of worlds. All it needed was the final activation command. "Tell Admiral Williams that it's been an honor," Turner said calmly. Then he completed the sequence. The wave of energy that erupted from the Zeridian network was visible across half the galaxy. It passed through normal matter harmlessly, but struck the Devourer ships like a physical blow. Their quantum phase systems collapsed simultaneously, trapping them in normal space where they were vulnerable to conventional weapons. The human fleet pressed their advantage ruthlessly. Captain Barnes led a squadron of fighters directly into the heart of the Devourer formation, her ships weaving between massive hulls to strike at critical systems. One by one, the ancient ships began to falter and die. But the victory came at a terrible price. Dr. Turner died at his console, his nervous system burned out by the feedback from the Zeridian network. Dozens of human ships were destroyed in the final assault, their crews giving their lives to ensure the galaxy's survival. When the last Devourer ship fell silent, the combined fleet found itself floating in a debris field that stretched across an entire star system. The ancient threat that had destroyed previous civilizations was finally dead, but the cost had been enormous. In the aftermath, as rescue ships searched for survivors and medical teams treated the wounded, a new kind of conversation began between humans and aliens. It wasn't the old relationship of exploitation and resentment, but something entirely different. Speaker Veltar approached Admiral Williams on the bridge of the Liberty, his crystal form somehow brighter and more solid than before. "How can we ever repay this debt?" he asked. Williams looked out at the mixed fleet of human and alien ships working together to clear the debris field. "By remembering what we accomplished here, by building something better than what came before." The new galactic alliance that emerged from the ashes of the old council was founded on principles that humanity had always advocated: equality among species, respect for individual rights, and the understanding that diversity of thought and approach made everyone stronger. Years later, as children of a dozen species learned together in schools built by cooperative effort, as mixed crews explored new frontiers together, as the galaxy healed from the wounds of war and prejudice, people would remember the day humanity walked away, and the terrible price of that lesson. The humans had returned not for revenge or recognition, but because saving lives was what they did. And in doing so,